Liberal journalist mocks Barron Trump at a mall. His stunning response leaves everyone silent. The Georgetown Mall hummed with the familiar weekend cacophony, children laughing, shopping bags rustling, and the constant murmur of hundreds of conversations blending into white noise. Outside, February wind whipped against the glass doors, making the security guard at the entrance pull his jacket tighter. "Man, I'm telling you, Professor Harrison's midterm is going to destroy us all," Jake Martinez groaned, adjusting his Georgetown University hoodie as he walked between his two friends. At 6'2", Jake was tall by any standard, but he still had to look up to talk to Barron Trump beside him. Barron chuckled, his hands in the pockets of his jeans. "It's constitutional law, not the end of the world." "Easy for you to say," Michael Chen chimed in from Barron's other side, his dark eyes twinkling with amusement. "You actually do the readings? Revolutionary concept, isn't it?" Barron's dry response made both his friends laugh. 20 feet behind them, two men in casual clothing maintained their distance. Secret Service agents Tony Morris and Steve Chen, no relation to Michael. They'd perfected the art of being present but invisible, allowing their 19-year-old charge as much normalcy as possible. Jake stopped suddenly at a store window, pressing his face against the glass. "Oh man, those new Jordans just dropped. Think I could convince my mom it's an educational expense?" "Sure," Michael deadpanned. "You need them for your advanced basketball economics class." A group of teenage girls walked past, doing double takes as they recognized Barron. They huddled together, whispering and giggling. It was a scene Barron had grown accustomed to, the looks, the whispers, the phone suddenly appearing in hands. He'd learned to act like he didn't notice. "Speaking of economics," Barron said, steering the conversation away from the attention, "anyone want to grab lunch? I'm starving." "Dude, we just had breakfast like 2 hours ago," Michael protested. "Yeah, but that was before Jake made us walk through every sports store in the mall." "Hey!" Jake pulled away from the window. "I'm a man with refined tastes. Is that what we're calling your sneaker obsession now?" Their easy banter was interrupted by a child's excited voice. Mom, look, it's him!" A boy, maybe 7 or 8, was pointing directly at Barron. His mother, looking embarrassed, tried to quiet him. "Tommy, it's not polite to point." Barron surprised his friends by walking over to the boy and kneeling down to his level. "Hi there, I'm Barron. What's your name?" The boy's eyes went wide. "Tommy, you're really tall." "Tommy?" his mother hissed, mortified. Barron laughed. "It's okay, and you're right, I am pretty tall. Do you play any basketball, Tommy?" "Yeah, I'm on the school team. Mom, can I get a picture, please?" The mother hesitated, clearly torn between not wanting to impose and making her son happy. Barron made the decision easier. "I'd be happy to take a picture if it's okay with your mom." After the photo was taken, and Tommy and his mother walked away, Tommy practically floating with excitement, Jake shook his head. "Man, you're good with kids." "Had a lot of practice with my nephew," Barron shrugged. "Theodore's a handful." They made their way toward the food court, passing stores with window displays advertising Valentine's Day sales. A teenage couple argued loudly outside Forever 21 about whether matching outfits were cute or cringe. The smell of cinnamon rolls wafted from Cinnabon, making Michael's stomach growl audibly. "So much for not being hungry," Jake teased. "That's different. That's Cinnabon. That's like a moral obligation." As they approached the food court, Barron noticed a familiar face at the Starbucks counter, Sarah Chen, the journalist who'd written several scathing articles about his family. She hadn't seen him yet, focused on her phone as she waited for her order. "Hey, maybe we should try that new Thai place instead," Barron suggested, trying to steer his friends away from potential drama. But it was too late. Sarah had looked up from her phone, her eyes widening with recognition. "You okay?" Michael asked, noticing Barron's sudden tension. "Yeah, just," Barron forced a smile. "Let's just say some people make their career writing hit pieces about my family." Jake glanced over at Sarah, who was now watching them intently. "Want to leave?" Barron considered it for a moment. Part of him wanted to avoid any confrontation, to maintain the peaceful afternoon with his friends. But another part of him was tired of always having to retreat, of letting others control where he could and couldn't go. "No," he decided, "I'm not doing anything wrong. We came to hang out and get lunch, so that's what we're going to do." "Your call, man." Michael said supportively. "But if anyone starts anything, then we handle it like adults," Barron finished firmly. "I'm not giving anyone ammunition for their next article." They found a table near Chick-fil-A, deliberately choosing one that wasn't too isolated, but also not in the center of attention. The Secret Service agents positioned themselves at nearby tables, still maintaining their invisible bubble of protection. "So," Jake said, trying to keep things normal, "about Professor Harrison's midterm." But Barron was only half listening. He could feel Sarah Chen's eyes on him, could see her setting up her phone on her table in a way that was clearly meant to record. The afternoon was about to take a turn, and they all knew it. "You know what's funny?" Barron said suddenly, interrupting Jake's complaints about constitutional amendments. "Everyone thinks they know you because they know your family. Like your whole identity is just an extension of someone else's story." Michael put down his phone, giving his friend his full attention. "Must be rough, man." "Sometimes. But then I remember something my mom told me once. She said, 'Your name might be their story, but your character is your own.'" "Your mom's pretty wise," Jake observed. "Yeah, she is." Barron smiled, then stood up. "I'm gonna grab some food. You guys want anything?" As he walked toward the Chick-fil-A counter, he could see Sarah Chen in his peripheral vision, gathering her things. The confrontation was coming. He could feel it in the air, like the static before a storm. But for now, he just ordered his food, exchanged pleasant small talk with the cashier, and tried to hold on to the normal afternoon for as long as he could. Because sometimes, the calm before the storm is valuable precisely because you know what's coming. The food court buzzed around him, oblivious to the tension building in their corner. A baby laughed at a nearby table. Someone dropped a tray, causing a momentary hush before conversation resumed. Regular people living regular lives, while Barron Trump waited for the other shoe to drop. He returned to his table with the food, setting it down just as Sarah Chen stood up from hers. Their eyes met briefly across the food court, and in that moment both knew exactly what was about to happen. The only question was, who would make the first move? Sarah Chen had built her career on moments like this. At 32, she'd already made a name for herself with her unflinching political coverage and what her supporters called truth-to-power confrontations. Her detractors used different words. Her most recent article about the Trump family had gone viral just last week, and her editor had been pushing for a follow-up. "Hey," Michael said quietly to Barron, "that woman's definitely recording us." Barron took a bite of his sandwich, chewing slowly. "I know. Want me to say something to security?" "No," Barron said. "She hasn't done anything wrong yet. Besides, the agents are already aware." Indeed, Tony Morris had shifted his position slightly, maintaining his casual appearance while getting a clearer view of Sarah's table. The veteran agent had handled hundreds of similar situations over the years. A young couple with a toddler settled at the table between Barron's group and Sarah, momentarily blocking their line of sight to each other. The father struggled with a high chair, while the mother tried to keep their squirming child from grabbing everything in reach. "Remember when that was Theo?" Jake asked, referring to Barron's nephew. Barron smiled, grateful for the distraction. "He once threw spaghetti all over a restaurant in Manhattan. Mom couldn't stop laughing, even though she was trying to look stern." "Your mom seems cool," Michael said, then quickly added, "I mean, from what you've told us." "She is. She's always been my." Barron trailed off, as the young family finally got settled, reopening the line of sight to Sarah's table. She was standing now, coffee in hand, phone clearly recording. "Incoming," Jake muttered. Sarah began walking toward their table, her heels clicking against the floor tiles. She moved with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before, who knew exactly how to create a scene while making it look like someone else's fault. The food court's ambient noise seemed to dim, though that might have just been Barron's perception. He could feel other people starting to notice, to turn their heads. It was a familiar sensation, the moment when a normal day turned into a viral video waiting to happen. "Just stay cool," Barron said, as much to himself as to his friends. "Whatever happens, stay cool." Sarah was halfway to their table when an unexpected interruption occurred. Tommy, the basketball-loving kid from earlier, came running back over, this time with a basketball in his hands. "Barron, look what my mom got me." The boy was beaming, completely oblivious to the tension in the air. Sarah Chen stopped in her tracks, clearly thrown off by the child's presence. Her phone was still recording, but now she had to recalculate. Attacking someone while they're talking to a child wasn't going to play well on social media. "That's awesome, Tommy." Barron's smile was genuine as he examined the basketball. "And it's already signed. Who's that from?" "Stephen Curry. Mom got it at the sports store." Tommy was practically bouncing with excitement. "Will you sign it too?" Barron's expression softened. "I'm not really anybody special, buddy. You should save the space for another real player." "But you're my friend, please." The sincerity in the boy's voice made several nearby diners smile. Even Sarah Chen's determined expression wavered slightly. "Tell you what," Barron said, pulling out a pen. "I'll sign it if you promise to keep practicing. Maybe someday, my signature will be worth something because I'm friends with the famous basketball player Tommy." The boy nodded solemnly, making everyone at the table grin. Barron signed the ball carefully, making sure not to write over Curry's signature. "Thanks." Tommy hugged the ball to his chest. "Mom says we have to go now, but it was cool meeting you." "You too, Tommy. Keep working on that jump shot." As Tommy ran back to his mother, Sarah Chen remained frozen in place, her coffee growing cold in her hand. The moment she'd been planning had been disrupted by the pure, unscripted humanity of a child's enthusiasm. But Sarah Chen hadn't become one of the most followed political journalists of her generation by letting moments slip away. She adjusted her grip on her phone, squared her shoulders, and resumed her approach to the table. The temporary reprieve was over. The confrontation was back on. Jake and Michael exchanged glances, both tensing up. The Secret Service agents maintained their positions but were clearly alert to every movement. And Barron just sat there, outwardly calm, though his friends could see his jaw clenching slightly. The storm was about to break. Sarah Chen's heels clicked against the food court floor like a metronome counting down to confrontation. Her coffee, now lukewarm, sloshed slightly in its paper cup as she approached. The phone in her other hand was steady, already recording what she hoped would be her next viral moment. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying just enough to draw attention from nearby tables. "Barron Trump, right? I'm Sarah Chen from the Capitol Beat." Jake started to stand, but Barron placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "It's okay," he said quietly, then turned to face Sarah. "Yes, I know who you are, Miss Chen." Sarah's eyebrows raised slightly, surprised by his composed acknowledgement. She'd expected, perhaps even hoped for, immediate defensiveness. "Oh, you follow my work?" "Your article last week about my father's business dealings was particularly memorable," Barron replied, his voice neutral. "You have quite a way with words." A small crowd was beginning to form, trying to look like they weren't watching while pulling out their phones. The young family with the toddler hurriedly gathered their things and moved to a different table, the mother shooting an apologetic look at Barron as they left. "Interesting that you'd mention business dealings," Sarah pressed, gaining confidence. "Speaking of which, how do you feel shopping at a mall that caters to the very people your father's policies would have hurt?" Michael muttered something under his breath, but Barron silenced him with a look. The food court's ambient noise had dropped significantly as more people tuned into the developing scene. "Miss Chen," Barron started, "I'm just trying to have lunch with my friends. If you'd like to schedule an actual interview." "Oh, but this is so much more authentic, isn't it?" Sarah's smile didn't reach her eyes. "The real Barron Trump, out in the wild. Tell me, what's it like trying to play normal college student when you grew up in a golden tower?" Tony Morris, the Secret Service agent, took a half step forward but stopped when Barron gave a subtle shake of his head. The last thing he wanted was to escalate this into a security incident. "You know what?" Jake stood up despite Barron's earlier warning. "This is harassment. You can't just—" "Jake," Barron cut in firmly, "please sit down." "But she's—" "Sitting down doesn't mean giving up," Barron said quietly. "It means choosing how we respond." Sarah's phone captured every word. "That's an interesting perspective on sitting down versus standing up. Would you say that's how you viewed the events of the 6th of January as well? Just sitting back and watching?" A collective intake of breath from the onlookers. Even Sarah's cameraman, who had been circling to get a better angle, looked uncomfortable with that jab. Barron's hands clenched under the table, but his voice remained steady. "I was 13 years old, Miss Chen. What exactly would you have had me do?" Age doesn't exempt you from responsibility, Sarah pressed, though something flickered in her eyes, perhaps a realization that she'd pushed too far. But she was live streaming now, and her followers were climbing by the second. No turning back. While other 13-year-olds were worried about their families losing healthcare, you were. Living in a bubble? Barron finished for her. Is that what you were going to say? You seem to have a lot of assumptions about my life. Are they just assumptions? Sarah moved closer, her coffee forgotten on a nearby table. While regular kids were struggling with remote learning during the pandemic, you had private tutors. While they worried about their parents losing jobs, you had a gold elevator. Don't you think that disconnects you from the real world? From real people? An older woman at a nearby table stood up. Leave him alone. He's just trying to eat lunch. Ma'am, Sarah turned to her, camera following. Don't you think the public has a right to know? The public has a right to eat their lunch in peace, the woman shot back. He's just a boy. I'm a journalist. You're being a bully, a teenage girl called out from another table. Sarah spun back to Barron, her composure cracking slightly. This wasn't going the way she'd planned. The crowd was sympathizing with the wrong person. She needed to regain control of the narrative. You know what's interesting? She said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. Everyone here is so quick to defend you, the poor little rich boy. But where was this energy when your father's administration was separating families at the border? When children younger than you were sleeping in cages? Barron stood up slowly, his full height making Sarah take an involuntary step back. But when he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost sad. Miss Chen, you don't know me. You don't know what I think about any of those policies. You don't know what conversations I've had with my father, or what I believe, or who I am as a person. You're not here for truth. You're here for clicks. Sarah's grip tightened on her phone. Then enlighten us. What do you believe? Where do you stand? You're asking a 19-year-old to answer for things that happened when he was a child, Jake interjected. How is that journalism? Stay out of this, Sarah snapped. This isn't about you. No, Barron agreed. It's not about him. But it's not about what you think it's about either. You want to know what I believe? I believe that if you really cared about any of those issues you just mentioned, you wouldn't be ambushing a college student at a mall. You'd be investigating current policies, interviewing affected families, doing actual journalism instead of creating social media moments. The crowd had grown larger. Phones were raised everywhere, recording from multiple angles. The Secret Service agents had moved closer, forming a loose perimeter while trying to maintain their low profile. Sarah felt the situation slipping away from her. Her live stream comments were turning against her. She needed something explosive, something that would justify this confrontation. What about the gold toilets? She asked, her voice rising. What about living in a tower with your name on it while people suffered? What about basic human decency? Michael stood up now too. What about the fact that you're attacking someone for things they had no control over? The public has a right. The public has a right to know what? Barron's voice finally rose to match hers. That I played basketball at school? That I helped my mom with her garden? That I stay up late studying for the same tests as everyone else? What exactly are you trying to expose here, Miss Chen? A mall security guard had appeared at the edge of the crowd, speaking into his radio. More people were gathering, drawn by the commotion. The food court had become a makeshift arena, with Sarah and Barron at its center. You live a life of privilege, Sarah insisted, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. Yes, Barron agreed simply. I do. I've never denied that. But does that privilege mean I deserve to be ambushed while eating lunch? Does it mean I don't deserve basic respect as a human being? The Trump family is not here right now. Barron cut her off. It's just me trying to have lunch with my friends. But you don't see me, do you? You don't see a college student or a person. You just see a headline. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's phone was still recording, but her arm had dropped slightly, the angle no longer optimal. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. In that moment of hesitation, Tommy's mother appeared at the edge of the crowd. She took in the scene, then turned to Sarah with a look of pure maternal disapproval. My son just met this young man, she said clearly. He was kind, patient, and treated Tommy with respect. What example are you setting right now? Sarah Chen, veteran journalist, winner of multiple awards for her hard-hitting political coverage, found herself speechless for the first time in her career. The crowd was murmuring, but not in the way she'd hoped. Her live stream comments were flooding with criticism, not of Barron, but of her. The confrontation had backfired spectacularly. But Sarah Chen hadn't gotten where she was by backing down easily. She squared her shoulders, raised her phone again, and prepared for one final push. The storm wasn't over yet. In fact, it was about to reach its peak. "You want to talk about privilege?" Sarah's voice had taken on a desperate edge. "Let's talk about how you're standing there in designer clothes while regular kids can't afford." "Target," Barron interrupted quietly. "What?" "My jeans, they're from Target, the sweater too." He tugged at the blue fabric. "Mom always said clothes don't make the person." Sarah faltered for a moment, her narrative crumbling further. But she pressed on, her career riding on this confrontation. "And I suppose your Secret Service detail is just a normal teenage accessory?" "No," Barron answered, his voice growing stronger. "They're here because people like you decided that my family name makes me a legitimate target for harassment. Because when I was 10 years old, adults on television joked about assassinating me. Because when I was 12, someone sent death threats to my school." The crowd had gone completely silent. Even the mall's background music seemed muted. "You don't get to use my security detail as a weapon against me," Barron continued, his hands trembling slightly but his voice steady. "Those men are here because a child needed protection from adults who thought their political views justified threatening a kid. How do you think that shapes someone's childhood, Miss Chen?" Sarah's phone wavered. The comments on her live stream were overwhelmingly negative now. "Leave him alone. This is disgusting. He was just a kid." Unsubscribing. "Your father?" she started, but Barron cut her off. "Is not here. I am. A 19-year-old college student trying to buy his friend a birthday present. But you don't see that, do you? You don't see me practicing basketball until midnight because I want to make the team on my own merit. You don't see me pulling all-nighters studying because I want to earn my own grades. You don't see me volunteering at the campus food bank every Wednesday because I understand what privilege means." Jake stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on his friend's shoulder. "Barron, we don't have to." "No, it's okay," Barron said, his eyes never leaving Sarah. "She wanted a story. Let's give her one. Want to know what it's really like, Miss Chen? Want to know what privilege and pain look like?" He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a small scar. "4th grade. A classmate pushed me down the stairs because his parents told him my dad was evil. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want to get him in trouble. I was 10. Sarah's camera captured every word, but not in the way she'd intended. The power dynamic had shifted completely. 7th grade, Barron continued, his voice thick with emotion. My English teacher asked me to write an essay apologizing for my family's actions. I was 13. The school board fired her. But do you know what that does to a kid? To sit in a classroom where your teacher hates you? The mall security guard had stopped trying to disperse the crowd. Even he was caught up in the moment. So yes, Miss Chen, I'm privileged. I've never worried about money. I've never wondered where my next meal would come from. But I've worried about other things. I've worried about making friends who like me for me, not my last name. I've worried about whether every person who smiles at me secretly hates me. I've worried about whether I deserve to be happy when so many people think I shouldn't be. Michael stepped up beside Jake, both flanking their friend protectively. The Secret Service agents remained alert, but let the scene play out, recognizing that this was a different kind of security. The security of friendship. And you know what the real privilege is? Barron's voice had grown quieter, but in the silence of the food court, every word carried. The privilege of having a mom who taught me that hate doesn't beat hate. Of having friends who see me as just Barron. Of learning that I don't have to carry the weight of other people's anger. He gestured to her phone. So go ahead. Post your video. Write your article. Tell everyone how you cornered the privileged Trump kid at a mall. But remember this moment, Miss Chen. Remember when you chose to ambush a teenager trying to have lunch with his friends, and ask yourself, what does that say about your privilege? The sound of applause started somewhere in the back of the crowd. It spread slowly at first, then faster, until the entire food court was clapping. Sarah Chen stood frozen, her phone still recording, but her face had lost all its certainty. Tommy's mother stepped forward again, this time addressing the crowd. I hope everyone posting videos remembers that kindness gets more views than cruelty. I know which version my son will see. The applause grew louder. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Leave him alone." Others joined in, the sentiment spreading like waves. Sarah Chen, for the first time in her career, found herself on the wrong side of public opinion. Her live stream numbers were dropping. Her phone felt heavy in her hand, weighted down by the truth she hadn't expected to capture. The story she'd come for was dying in front of her eyes. But another story, a more important one, was being born in its place. The food court had become unnaturally quiet. Sarah Chen's phone was still recording, but her hand had started to tremble slightly. The crowd's hostility was palpable now, directed not at Barron Trump but at her. A mall maintenance worker had stopped mopping, his bucket forgotten beside a pillar. A group of teenagers who had been laughing about something on TikTok now stood silent, their own phones capturing every moment. Even the background music seemed to have faded away, as if the mall itself was holding its breath. "You don't understand," Sarah said, but her voice had lost its aggressive edge. "This isn't personal. The public has a right to know." "Know what?" An elderly man stood up from his table, his half-eaten burger forgotten. "Know that you can bully a kid in public? I'm old enough to remember when journalists had integrity." Sarah spun toward him. "Sir, with all due respect." "Respect?" he scoffed. "Is that what you call this?" Barron raised his hand slightly, silencing the growing murmurs from the crowd. When he spoke, his voice was different, not angry, not defensive, but heavy with something deeper. "Miss Chen," he said quietly, "can I tell you a story?" Sarah hesitated, her phone still recording. This wasn't going according to her plan, but she was live now. She couldn't just walk away. "Go ahead." "When I was 14, right after everything that happened at the Capitol, I had this teacher, Mr. Rodriguez. Every day, I'd walk into his class, and he'd look at me like I was personally responsible for everything wrong in the world." Barron's friends shifted uncomfortably, hearing this story for the first time themselves. "One day, he kept me after class. I thought he was going to yell at me, maybe say something about my dad. But instead, he sat down and said, 'Barron, I disagree with everything your father stands for. But that's not your burden to carry.'" Sarah's phone dipped slightly, her journalistic instincts recognizing a different kind of story emerging. "He told me something I'll never forget," Barron continued. "He said, 'The world will try to make you explain yourself, defend yourself, prove yourself, but you don't owe anyone your pain.'" A woman in the crowd wiped her eyes. Someone else sniffled audibly. "So here we are, Miss Chen. You ambushed me at a mall, trying to get me to explain myself, defend myself, prove myself. But I don't owe you my pain. I don't owe you my trauma. I don't owe you a performance of guilt or privilege or whatever story you came here to write." Sarah's professional facade cracked slightly. "I'm just trying to do my job." "Your job?" Michael couldn't stay quiet any longer. "Your job is to harass people eating lunch? To hold power accountable?" Sarah shot back, but her voice wavered. "Power?" Barron laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "What power do you think I have? The power to try to be normal for one afternoon? The power to eat lunch with my friends without becoming a headline?" Jake stepped forward. "You want to talk about power? Let's talk about the power of a grown woman ambushing a college student with a camera. Let's talk about the power of turning someone's lunch into content for your followers." "That's not," Sarah started, but Barron cut her off. "You know what the hardest part is?" His voice cracked slightly. "It's not the articles or the comments or the looks. It's the fact that people like you never see me as just me. I'm always a symbol, a target, a representation of something. Never just a 19-year-old trying to figure out who he is." The emotion in his voice hit something in Sarah. Her phone lowered completely. "Do you know what it's like?" Barron continued, years of bottled feelings finally spilling out. "To have adults analyze your childhood photos for signs of trauma. To have strangers debate your mental health online. To have your growth spurts turned into conspiracy theories." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration that made him look suddenly younger. "I was 13 when someone photoshopped my face onto violent images. 13. My mom tried to shield me from it, but you can't shield kids from the internet. Do you know what that does to someone? To see adults celebrating the idea of you being hurt? Sarah's face had lost all its color. The comments on her live stream were a flood of criticism now, but she barely noticed. You want to know about privilege? Barron's voice was shaking now. Here's privilege. Having Secret Service agents who became like uncles because they were the only adults I could trust outside my family. Having a mom who taught me that forgiveness isn't weakness. Having friends who don't film me when I'm having a bad day. He gestured to the phone in her hand. So go ahead, post your video, write your article, tell everyone how you made the Trump kid cry in a mall. But ask yourself this. What did you actually accomplish today? What great truth did you expose? That a teenager has feelings? That words can hurt? That trauma doesn't check party affiliation? Tommy, who had been watching from behind his mother's legs, suddenly broke free and ran to Barron. The boy hugged him around the waist, a pure gesture of childhood empathy that made several people in the crowd audibly gasp. Sarah Chen stood frozen, her phone capturing a moment she never intended. Not of privilege exposed, but of humanity revealed. Her live stream comments were a blur of criticism. This is journalism? Leave him alone. She should be ashamed. Poor kid. The elderly man who had spoken earlier stood up again. Young lady, he addressed Sarah. I marched for civil rights in the 60s. I know what speaking truth to power looks like. This ain't it. Barron gently patted Tommy's head, then looked back at Sarah. You know what Mr. Rodriguez told me at the end of that year? He said, your name might be their story, but your character is your own. So here's my character, Miss Chen. Here's who I am. Not the story you came for, maybe, but the truth you accidentally found. The silence that followed was profound. Sarah Chen, who had built her career on fearless confrontations, found herself speechless in the face of raw, unscripted humanity. The breaking point had come, but not in the way anyone expected. Something had broken, yes, but maybe it was something that needed to break. The carefully constructed narratives, the predetermined roles of villain and victim, the simplified stories we tell ourselves about other people's lives. In their place, something else was emerging. Something more complicated, more human, and ultimately more true. Sarah's producer, who had been filming from a distance, lowered his camera and walked away, shaking his head. That single action seemed to break something in Sarah's professional armor. She started, then stopped. For the first time, she looked around at the crowd, really looked. She saw the disappointed faces, the protective stances, the phones recording her instead of Barron. The narrative had completely flipped. An older woman who had been quietly watching the whole scene stood up from her table. I didn't vote for your father, she said to Barron. I opposed pretty much everything he stood for. But honey, you were just a child. You still are in many ways. And what's happening right now? This isn't journalism. This is just cruelty wearing a press badge. Tommy was still standing near Barron, looking up at him with complete trust. His mother came over and gently took his hand. But before leaving, she turned to Sarah. My son is 8, she said quietly. Tonight, he's going to ask me why that lady was being mean to his new friend. What should I tell him? Sarah's hand was shaking so badly now that she nearly dropped her phone. The live stream was still going, capturing every excruciating moment of her unraveling narrative. I thought. Sarah's voice was barely audible. I thought I was exposing privilege. Speaking truth to power. Power? Jake scoffed. The power to try to have one normal afternoon? Barron placed a calming hand on his friend's shoulder. It's okay, he said, then addressed Sarah directly. You know what real privilege is, Miss Chen? It's being able to walk away from this moment. To go home and write whatever story you want. To move on to your next target while the people you expose live with the aftermath. A tear rolled down Sarah's cheek, catching her completely off guard. She wiped it away quickly, but not before several phones captured it. Your mother, she said suddenly, surprising everyone. In my article last week, I called her complicit, said she was enabling. I wrote that without ever. Without ever what? Barron asked gently. Without ever thinking about how it would feel to read that about your mom. Sarah's voice cracked. I have a mom too. If someone wrote those things about her. The crowd had grown eerily quiet. watching this unexpected moment of vulnerability from someone who, moments ago, had been the aggressor. Michael, who had been quiet for a while, spoke up. "You know what's crazy? If you just asked for an interview like a normal person, Barron probably would have given you one." Barron nodded. "Still would." Sarah's head snapped up. "What?" "Not today," Barron clarified. "Not like this. But if you want to have a real conversation about growing up in the spotlight, about privilege, about responsibility, I'd be willing to do that. No ambush, no gotcha moments. Just a conversation." The food court had become so quiet you could hear the distant hum of the mall's air conditioning. Sarah Chen, award-winning journalist known for her fearless confrontations, found herself faced with something she hadn't expected: compassion. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you offer that after this?" Barron smiled sadly. "Because maybe we both have something to learn from each other. Because maybe the story you came for isn't as interesting as the story you could tell. Because maybe, Miss Chen, it's time for both of us to stop playing the roles other people expect us to play." Tony Morris, the Secret Service agent, stepped forward slightly. "Sir, your next class." Barron nodded, acknowledging the time. "Think about it, Ms. Chen. A real interview, a real conversation. Not about my father, not about politics, but about what it means to grow up with everyone watching, waiting for you to fail. About what it means to be 19 and carry the weight of a name you didn't choose." He gathered his things, his friends doing the same. The crowd began to disperse, but not before many of them gave Sarah looks that ranged from disappointment to outright disgust. As Barron turned to leave, Sarah called out, her voice small and uncertain, so different from the confident tone she'd arrived with. "I'm sorry," she said, barely audible. I didn't." Barron paused. "I know," he said simply. "That's usually the problem, isn't it? We don't think about the human being behind the story we've already decided to tell." With that, he walked away, flanked by his friends and security detail. The food court slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but something had changed. Something fundamental had shifted in the air, in the story, in the very nature of what had just happened. Sarah Chen stood alone, her phone still recording, capturing nothing but her own reflection in the polished mall floor. The breaking point had come and gone, leaving behind something unexpected: the possibility of understanding. Sarah Chen sat alone in her apartment that evening, staring at her laptop screen. Her phone lay face down on the desk, still buzzing with notifications she couldn't bring herself to check. The footage from the mall incident had already gone viral, but not in the way she'd planned. Her editor's email glared at her from the screen. "Sarah, call me ASAP. This is not the kind of journalism we do, Marcus." She picked up her phone, scrolling through the thousands of comments. Disgusting behavior from a so-called journalist. She really thought she did something here. That poor kid handled it with so much grace. Unsubscribed. This is not journalism. Her hands trembling slightly, she opened her draft document and began to type. "Today, I learned a lesson about prejudice from an unexpected source." She deleted it. Started again. "An apology to Barron Trump and to journalism itself." Delete. Another attempt. "The story I didn't come for. A journalist's reflection on humanity and hubris." The cursor blinked accusingly on her screen. In the background, her television was playing clips from the incident, different angles captured by the crowd, all showing the same thing: her aggression, his dignity. Her phone rang. It was Marcus. "I'm not posting the video," she said immediately upon answering. "It's already out there," Marcus replied, his voice tired. "Not from our channel, but everyone else has it. You're trending, Sarah, not in a good way." She closed her eyes. "I know. What were you thinking? Ambushing a college kid at lunch? This isn't what we do." "I thought." She paused, remembering Barron's words about stories we decide to tell before knowing the truth. "I thought I was speaking truth to power. I was wrong." A long silence from Marcus, then, "Write it." "What?" "Write the real story. Not the hit piece you went for. Write about what actually happened today. About what you learned. Raw, honest, no spin." Sarah looked at her laptop screen again. "I don't know if I can." "That's exactly why you should," Marcus said. "When's the last time you wrote something that scared you?" After hanging up, Sarah sat in silence for several minutes. Then, slowly, she began to type. I went to the Georgetown Mall today to ambush Barron Trump. That sentence alone should make any real journalist cringe. We don't ambush people. We don't target teenagers having lunch with their friends. We don't mistake cruelty for courage. But I did all of those things. And in doing so, I learned more about journalism, humanity, and myself than any award-winning exposé has ever taught me. Her phone buzzed again. A text from her mother. Saw the video. Remember when you were bullied in high school? You just became what you once hated. Sarah's hands froze over the keyboard. The memory hit her hard. 15 years old, surrounded by laughing classmates, someone filming her worst moment. How had she become this? She continued writing. In my years of political journalism, I've prided myself on asking hard questions. Today, I have to ask the hardest questions of all, and answer them honestly. What makes a journalist? Is it the ability to create viral moments? To generate clicks? To expose people in their private moments? Or is it something more, something I forgot somewhere along the way? Her doorbell rang. It was Tommy's mother. She recognized her from the mall. Her heart sank. How did you? Your address is public record, the woman said simply. My son has something he wants to say to you. Tommy stepped forward, clutching his basketball, the one Barron had signed. Why were you mean to my friend? The simple question, asked with a child's directness, hit harder than any criticism she'd received all day. Sarah struggled to find words. I made a mistake. You should say sorry, Tommy said firmly. Mom says when we make mistakes, we have to say sorry and mean it. His mother put a hand on his shoulder. We saw you recording everything. Are you going to post it? Sarah shook her head. I'm writing something else instead. Something true. Good, Tommy's mother nodded. Because my son learned 2 lessons today. One from Barron Trump about kindness, and one from you about how not to treat people. After they left, Sarah returned to her laptop with renewed purpose. She wrote through the night, ignoring calls from other news outlets wanting comments. She wrote about prejudice and preconceptions, about the stories we tell ourselves to justify cruel actions. She wrote about a teenager who showed more maturity than a veteran journalist. Morning found her still writing. Her article had become something else entirely, not an exposé of a privileged teenager, but an examination of privilege itself. The privilege of having a platform. The privilege of being able to hurt others under the guise of journalism. The privilege of forgetting our own humanity in pursuit of a story. Her phone rang again. Unknown number. Miss Jen? This is Tony Morris, Secret Service. Her heart stopped. Mr. Trump, Barron, asked me to pass along a message. He's still willing to do that interview, if you're interested. Real questions, real answers. No ambush needed. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. Why? Why would he? Because, Tony said, sometimes the best stories are the ones that change the storyteller. She looked at her draft article, now nearly complete. It wasn't the story she'd gone to the mall to write. It was better. It was true. Her editor called again as she was finishing the final paragraph. How's it coming? Marcus asked. It's done, Sarah said quietly. But it's not what anyone expected. Is it honest? Yes. Maybe for the first time. Then publish it. Sarah took a deep breath and typed the final lines. Yesterday, I went to the Georgetown Mall to expose privilege. Instead, I exposed something else. My own prejudice, my own cruelty, my own failure as a journalist and as a human being. But in that failure, in that moment of total humiliation, I found something unexpected. Hope. Hope in the form of a 19-year-old's capacity for forgiveness. Hope in the wisdom of a child with a basketball. Hope in the possibility that even when we become what we once despised, we can find our way back to humanity. I went to the mall to tell a story about Barron Trump. Instead, he told a story about me. About all of us. About what happens when we forget that behind every headline, every tweet, every viral moment, there's a human being just trying to live their life. I'm sorry, Barron, and thank you for teaching this journalist what real integrity looks like. Her cursor hovered over the Publish button. In that moment, she remembered something her first editor had told her. The best stories aren't the ones that get the most clicks. They're the ones that make both the writer and the reader better people. She clicked publish. Sometimes the truth hits hard. But sometimes that's exactly what we need. Within hours of publishing, Sarah's article went viral, but in a completely different way than her usual pieces. The comments section filled with responses she never expected. This brought me to tears. Real journalism is admitting when we're wrong. I've never seen a reporter show this kind of honest self-reflection. Thank you for showing us that growth is possible. Her phone rang again. Marcus. Sarah, he said, his voice softer than before. This is the best thing you've ever written. Because it's honest, she replied quietly. No, he corrected. Because it's human. Later that afternoon, she received an email from an unexpected source. From Melania Trump. Subject, thank you. Dear Ms. Chen, I read your article. As a mother who has watched her son endure so much, I want to thank you for your honesty. Barron told me about your conversation at the mall. He also told me about your agreement to do a real interview. When you're ready, we would like to help arrange that. Not as a political statement, but as a conversation between two people trying to understand each other better. Sometimes the greatest strength is admitting when we've been wrong. Best regards, Melania Trump. Sarah sat back in her chair, overwhelmed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tommy's mother. Tommy read your article with help. He says you're forgiven because that's what friends do. He wants to know if you'll come to his next basketball game. Barron already promised to be there. The tears came freely now. Sarah picked up her phone and dialed Tony Morris's number. Mr. Morris, please tell Barron. Tell him I'd like to take him up on that interview offer. But first, I have a basketball game to attend. She looked at her reflection in the window. Not a journalist chasing a story, but a person learning to be better. Outside, the sun was setting over Georgetown, painting the sky in colors of hope and redemption. Her computer pinged with another notification. The article had just hit 1 million views. But for the first time in her career, Sarah Chen didn't care about the numbers. She cared about the truth, not the truth she'd gone looking for, but the truth that had found her instead. Opening a new document, she began to type. Part 2. The interview that changed everything. A conversation about growth, forgiveness, and the stories we choose to tell. But that would be another story. For another day. For now, she had a basketball game to prepare for, and a young boy's forgiveness to earn. Sometimes the best stories aren't the ones we set out to write, but the ones that write themselves on our hearts instead.